is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is you see me? This is Spoil Me, covering The Grace of Kings, brought to you by Kyle. Chapters 31 and 32. In these chapters, we have a little bit of lull in the action as people sit back and reflect on what has been happening, what is to be done next, and whether they did the right thing. Some of us are a little bit more self-aware than others. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. So, yeah, guys, is he falling prey to the same shit that Kuni fell prey to in the last chapter? Because it feels that way. And it feels like everyone is too afraid of him to call him on it. He doesn't have that pack of friends to pour ice cold water over his head and snap him the fuck out of it. And I am very concerned that in light of this development of his personality, what is going to be revealed about the I don't remember the word that they use for it, but whatever the passage is to get to the capital is going to receive a much more volatile reaction than it otherwise would have. And otherwise it would have been bad enough. But with Mata in his present state of mind, I'm really worried about it. Like, this isn't gonna go well if he doesn't learn how to stop and take a breath and listen to people. And he's at the point now where he genuinely thinks that he is a god. And yikes, how do you come back from that? Like, Kuni, his situation was just like, don't I deserve, after everything that I've been through and sacrificed and done for people, don't I deserve something nice? And, of course, it gets escalated to far beyond something nice, but he never really gets to the point Mata's at, apparently. And I'm very concerned that there is no turning back now. And I don't know if even Kuni could talk him out of it, because it seems like now he is like recontextualizing his conversations with Kuni to tell himself that Kuni's just weak and not really see how level-headed Kuni is and how much he has contributed to the success of everything overall. He wants to think that just being able to brute force his way through is going to be enough. And it's really hard to watch because it's the same exact shit. Kyle says, wait, I thought I come 31 through 33. Was it too long? Oh, no, Kyle. I'm sorry. I read 31 and 32. I'll do an extra long episode next time to make up for it. I'm so sorry. I misread. I thought it seemed a little short, but then I was flying through it. So yeah, I'm sorry. That's my bad. And I overread for the last one. I'm not doing well today. But yeah, next time you can include 33 and the other ones, and I'll do an extra long one to make up for it. So sorry about that. But okay, so Mata. Oh, guys, I'm going to read some of this here. So first of all, we have Kaima, or Kaima. I'm going to go with Kaima, who is it's sort of, in retrospect, rereading this line is a little bit heartbreaking. But he says he's thinking to himself about the fact that Mata is really a threat on land. But if Kaima has all of these ships at his disposal, and the rebels have burned all of their own ships in order to block people from leaving the harbor, they haven't got any defense. So he can come in here and just cause chaos. And he might have been right. If things had not gone down quite the way that they did. But Kaima is, the last sentence from his point of view is, Zindu wants to gamble with all the lives of his men? Well, let him. Oh, Kaima, how you underestimate the truth of that sentence. It is so much more true than you know. And it turns out to be like... First, I want to acknowledge that this book deals a lot more in supernatural intercession than I expected. And I'm not exactly sure how I feel about it, because it's one thing when the gods are observing and we see things like their point of view, rooting for somebody or pulling the strings in these little ways that they can get away with or whatever. But when they're able to like walk up to somebody and demand something of them and kind of blackmail them into giving it, because what it turns out to be, it's Tazu, I think is the god, right? Tazu basically demands this huge sacrifice from Mata, and when it appears Mata is not going to give it to him, kills a bunch of people and wrecks his ships. And it's like, you know, you can make the request and see what Mata does, but when you kill a bunch of people anyway, of course he's going to give you the sacrifice to mitigate the damage. It's not done freely the way that... So the whole way that this gets handled by Tazu, and the fact that, like, his brothers and sisters, like, his sister's really mad at him, but then one of the others steps in and is like, well, technically he didn't break any of the rules. I'm like, didn't he? I'm not sure that's entirely true. I feel like he really forced Mata's hand here. And as much as I don't, like, I wish that Mata had not caved, we also do see that Mata's enemies get, like, swallowed whole. So it seems to pay off in the end when he does it. But in the meanwhile, he is, like, at the mercy of this god in a way that bums me out, that makes me feel like his agency has been taken away a little bit. And so while I am holding him responsible for the way he chooses to interpret things, and the fact that he is getting high on his own shit, I do feel to a degree that, like, I don't hold him responsible the same way I might otherwise have done. It just adds a layer to me of uncertainty to how much people can be held responsible that I don't know we need. And I was cool with the level that we were at in the other parts of the story. But once we reach this, I feel like it's crossed over into another type of story. And I'm like, I don't know if I like this after all, the way that you've chosen to handle all of this. So anyway, let's talk about Mata's buying into his own hype. Mata Zindu began to call himself the Marshal of Kukru. Turulu Pairing drafted a proclamation, and none of the kings and nobles on Wolf's Paw made a peep of objection. Mata didn't wait for an order from King Thufi. That shepherd boy would be nothing without him and his uncle. Refiroa alone was worth 10 Thufis. He, not Pashi Roma, had saved the rebellion from certain defeat. He, not Thufi, had conquered the invincible Kindo Marana. He, and no one else, had overcome an army of 40,000 with 2,000 berserkers. He had not resorted to tricks or stratagems. He had won by pure courage and battle lust. It was the fairest and therefore the sweetest victory in the world. Thufi was a figurehead, and Mata didn't need him. Turulu Pairing was right. Whatever he wanted and thought he deserved, Mata had to take for himself. Wallowing in self-pity had been foolish. The world respected a man who respected himself. Now listen, I don't disagree entirely with the sentiment. The world respects a man who respects himself is absolutely true. I think when Turulu Pairing called him out and was like, you need to stop being a sullen little boy sulking in the corner and make it clear you deserve any of this instead of expecting it to be handed to you, I think he was 100% in the right. But Mata is turning it into, I will take what I want. that's not exactly the sentiment that Tarulu was going for. Tarulu was like, if you really believe that you deserve something, you have to make it clear that you deserve it and make it happen for yourself. Whereas Mata's sort of like, well, if I'm strong enough, I'll just take whatever I want because who's going to stop me? And there's a really different vibe to that. That's more predatory. That's like, it's just, the whole thing is so, it's such a fine line that I can understand how Mata has fallen into this like trap in a way. But I'm just so worried because he doesn't seem to have the support system of people who love him for who he is on a personal level that Kuni does. So there's nobody to call him back from the edge. And yeah, I'm just super concerned about him because, you know, I was laughing at the way that Huni, is it Huni? Huno, like, you know, elevated himself from being like a peasant boy to suddenly thinking that he deserved to be king, that everybody was out to get it. Like, he really just, he turned everything around in such a dramatic way. And it was 100% based on what's the word I want? Prophecy that he wrote fucking himself. And yet chose to completely forget that part. And I laughed because it was so absurd, but such a human nature sort of thing to try and forget the origin of something because it doesn't benefit you. But Mata is doing the same thing in some ways, except that it's so much more dangerous with him because he does seem to be special. There is something about him that's different. Ihuno Krima was like, you know, just managed to luck into a lot of stuff because he struck the iron while it was hot, while people were angry and willing to throw themselves wholeheartedly behind any movement that was going to tear down the oppression they were experiencing. So Huno himself wasn't special. He just was an opportunist and really picked his timing well. Mata is an 8-foot-tall, double-pupiled murder machine. He is unusual in every sense of the word. He is larger than life. He is, it feels almost superhuman. So with Huno, you could dismiss it as just being like, well, you wrote that shit yourself, and you're just like slowly like bumping off everybody who remembers that, and how ridiculous. But when you see the results of somebody buying into their own hype, when they are in a position to think some sort of things about themselves, it feels so much more frightening and dangerous and insidious. And there is nothing that nobody is willing to stand up to him in any way at all. And that's the part that, like, when he speaks and everybody is either dead ass silent, not looking at him, not willing to like contradict him on anything. And when he isn't speaking, they are all falling all over themselves to flatter him in the most absurd terms. It's feeding on itself. It's like a self-fulfilling nightmare in a way. And in some ways, as much as like Mata needs to have some judgment and pull back from this, if you are gifted with the strength and I don't even want to just say appearance, because it's more than appearance. If you were gifted with the strength and advantage over the average man that Mata has, wouldn't you think that you were special? Wouldn't you start to buy into that? Wouldn't you think that maybe I deserve all of this? You know, like, it's something that I feel gets at the heart of the matter a lot more in some ways than Huno's example did. Huno Krima is somebody we can all laugh at. Hunokrama is like, there was a rapper recently who nobody had barely heard of. And he went on, he was on Facebook Live, I think. And he posted about how he was I'm not making this up. You can find this. On Facebook Live, this rapper who's like low-level successful, but not somebody that I think most of you would know if I mentioned his name. He saying to Facebook Live that he is like the best R&B artist alive today. He is saying this with dead seriousness. And in the middle of him saying this, a man comes up to him asking for his car because the man mistakes this supposedly best R&B artist of the day for one of the valet parking attendants. It's like the most embarrassing thing. It's so pathetic and so funny in its way and also really sad. And this guy really thinks that he's something. And obviously, like, he's not out there with a posse of people. There's no paparazzi following him around. He just looks like a guy and nobody knows who he is, but he's out here stunting on his Facebook Live. Like, everybody has to respect him. And he is Hunokrama, somebody that we can laugh at and point at and be like, do you fucking believe this guy? Mata is more like, I feel like Mata's more, I'm trying to think because I want to say something like a Steve Jobs, but that's too cerebral because Steve Jobs, was somebody that also bought into his hype, I think, but was really gifted. But I feel like I want to put it on a more of a physical level. So I'm going to say that Mata is more like maybe a Kobe Bryant or like a Tom Brady, somebody who is out of his league in terms of his skill and is treated because he has talent that other people don't have. He just does. And sometimes that's the way it works. But like, how do you balance the fact that you are able to do something other people can't with being aware that you're still a person, you're still a human being, and you still have responsibilities to other people to respect them as people and to remember that you are mortal. And he literally doesn't remember that he's mortal. And he's literally looking at other people with nothing but contempt because he can't, like, the only people that he treats with respect are Naman and Marana because the two of them were able to almost defeat him and seem to have some like tactical prowess. Naman, obviously, his body was carried away by birds, which is amazing. I still love that so much. Marana, he has to sort of force himself to respect. I'm going to read this. Marana's small frame had surprised him, and he could not understand why Kikomi had chosen this sallow, weak man over him. More evidence of her lack of judgment and true nobility, perhaps. Faced with such an inferior specimen of manhood, Mata found himself unable to even summon feelings of jealousy at this, quote, rival for Kikomi's affections. It was beneath him. He might even magnanimously ask Marana to serve him one day like the ancient heroes did with their defeated foes. He hadn't thought that far yet. I am the princeps, he thought, first among equals. No, that was not quite right. What other mortal man could compare to him in valor and strength of arms? Fucking nobody, that's who. Unfortunately, like, he's right, but saying, like, oh, well, I'm equal to everyone, and then he stops himself and is like, that doesn't feel true. This is when it comes to, like, nature versus nurture. And if you are inherently born away and have skills that you are just, like, and you maybe didn't necessarily earn this, maybe you don't get credit for it. But when you live in a world where the gods are running around, it's that there's no way you don't assume, well, maybe I didn't earn this, but I was ordained by the gods. And that's part of why the gods being as involved with the story as they are now is giving me pause, because it takes a lot of logic right out of the situation and makes it so that he can go and run off with this whole idea of, like, being the chosen one. And what sucks is that I basically called him the chosen one from the beginning of the book. I fucking 100% did this thing where I'm like, well, he's obviously like legendary status Pokemon and is the one that's going to save everybody. And now that he is thinking that of himself, I'm like, wait, buddy. But that's what it's supposed to be, really, is that you get called a hero. You don't call yourself a hero. You get chosen to be king. You don't choose to be king. And again, it's such a blurry line that I'm just like, ugh. So, and I think I'm really hopeful that he is going to do what he's sort of alluding to here, which is putting Marana into a position as an advisor. Because Marana is a smart motherfucker. I said it before, and I'll say it again. I was so grudging in my admiration because he represented Zana, which was everything that I hated. But Marana is exceptional in his mind. And him plus Kuni, like, that's a pretty fucking baller team, man. Like, you could do so much with people like that. Marana is just really good at reading human nature, at thinking like 4 steps ahead. He's just got such a logical, ordered mind. And that's not always going to be what you want. Kuni is the feelings guy. Kuni is somebody who's like, well, you've got to appeal to their, their sense of family or their sense of honor, or you've got like, Kuni is really good at manipulating an overall tide of emotional response. But Marana is like, so maybe that's how they feel, but what will they do? And he uses the evidence of what they have already done to inform that. And the two of them together, like, forget it. So I'm very hopeful, because I think I said to you guys that I was kind of low-key bummed that Marana got caught out. I didn't want him to die. It felt like a waste. And I still feel that way. So I hope that Mata follows through on this. I really do. Okay. But first he had to get his army off of Wolf's Paw and into Gajira, from where he would march through Thoko Pass. Thoko Pass, that's the one. And into the Immaculate City. Thoko Pass is the one that I'm concerned about. The blockade of Wolf's Paw by the Armada presented only a minor difficulty. He set his army to the task of building new ships, and the island's verdant hills were soon denuded of trees. So here it comes. An old woman came to see the new Marshal of Zindu. She walked with the aid of a cane, and her hair was all white, but her face glowed with health and vigor above the shawl of shark skin and necklace of shark's teeth. "I can speak to Tazu," the old woman said. And of course, all the priests at this point are just like, heresy, this is bullshit, kick her out of here. And Mata's like, oh, shut up, y'all. And he asks her to come and speak to him. And she says, Tazu can help you leave Wolf's Paw, but first he must be given sacrifices, and won't say any more until everybody else is ordered to leave the hall. And then she whispers in his ear. Mata's eyes grew wide. He shrank back. Who are you? That is a foolish question, the old woman said, but she didn't sound like an old woman anymore. Her voice was deep and sonorous, and the walls of the audience hall shook as she spoke. She sounded like waves striking against the sea wall and strong currents swirling in the deep. She stood with her back straight and held her cane like a weapon. She smiled, and her face was as fierce as a shark's. You already know the answer. And she tells him that she's merely hungry. Mata says no, and she says, you're wondering what Kuni-Guru would think of you if you did as I asked, and Mata doesn't reply. I've said my piece. Do as you will. And suddenly, she was frail and ancient again as she shuffled her way out of the ancient hall. So, they are able to make ships in 20 days. Which is banana pants. And then we get this whole thing of everybody praising Mata as he walks by. Their words tickled his heart and made him feel like he was floating on clouds. So he says that we're going to sail tomorrow. And then that very night, the greatest storm in living memory swept through Tawaza Harbor. The howling of the winds clashing against one another caused those living closest to the sea to go deaf. The waves smashing against the coast were so high that they flooded the palace. The streets of Toaza turned into canals, and sharks swam through them in the morning, as dazed as the citizens watching them from third-story windows. The fleet of new ships disappeared. Only a few broken masts and smashed boards were left. 1,000 men who had already boarded the ships to break them in and keep watch were killed. Come on. This is not a voluntary sacrifice. This is not fair. I do not care for this kind of play. Is this the price for defying the gods? Mata talked to himself rather than the cowering courtiers. Or perhaps this is a reminder of the weight of history. So, here comes a thing that's sort of similar to, again, Hunokrima, where the prisoners are put in charge of dealing with soldiers. And they are pretty abusive because these are imperial soldiers that some of them worked under. Some of them were, what's the word? Conscripted. And now that they were supposed to be comrades with their erstwhile tormentors, the men of Kakru exacted revenge in ways big and small. Latrine duty was always assigned to the former Imperials, as was cooking, cleaning, and standing guard at night. And during the day, as the former Imperials toiled at shipbuilding, the men of Kakru stood around and taunted them to work harder and faster. Morale among Mata's men rose despite the loss of the First Fleet. Tormenting the Zana soldiers offered a concrete form of justice. So, if he had left it here and made decent ships, I'm not saying this could have been avoided, because obviously Tazu is determined to interfere. So Tazu probably would have wreaked havoc again. But it feels like this was sufficient to everyone in terms of their, what's the word I want? Their thirst for vengeance, right? But Mata has decided that he is going to cave to the demands of this god. And he takes it one step further by killing all of them. And this is something that, if they were still prisoners, it might have been taken one way. But the fact that these men all voluntarily surrendered and, I think, pledged their loyalty to Mata, became part of his army, this is a whole different thing. And let's see, Rotho's favorite game was to order these men to carry the great oak trees cut from the mountains down to the harbor. He would assign 16 men to each tree and tell them that they had to walk all the way down from the mountain without ever setting the tree on the ground for a break. When the exhausted men inevitably dropped the tree before reaching their destination, he would make them leave the tree where it was and go back for another one. This was a diversion he never tired of. After what you Zana bastards put my father through, he whipped them. I'm practically giving you massages. Oh, Rotho, don't do this. Or maybe it's Rotho. There's a lot of complaining among the surrendered soldiers, Rotho said. Many officers think that a mutiny is likely. Let them complain, Matazindu said, his voice quiet. You spared their lives. They should be on their knees every day thanking you, Rotho said. Rot, sometimes it can be both too late to curse the gods and too early to thank men. Rotho didn't know what Marshal Zindu meant. All he knew was that the surrendered Zana soldiers were ungrateful. Well, what Mata meant was that, no, they should not be thanking me because I am about to kill them anyway. They constructed a new fleet, heavy, slow, crude transports. They resembled large boxes hammered together hastily with no thought about seaworthiness, stability, or maneuverability. Mata piles everybody, all of these Zana soldiers, into these ships, and they are all under the impression that they are going to be ferried to the other side, I guess. Or that they are going to be ferried over to the opposing fleet and to attack. The ship sailed out of Tawaza Harbor, and men held their breath in the darkness, waiting for the armada to strike. But nothing happened, and the ships sailed on. Did Marshal Zindu's fearsome reputation keep the Imperial ships at bay? Gradually, the men in the suffocating dark were lulled to sleep by the gentle rocking motion of the ships, still standing and leaning against their comrades. Hours passed, and with a jolt, some woke from their slumber. It was very quiet. The decks above their heads creaked, but there was no sound of footsteps. Shouldn't the cargo holds be open to allow some of the men to go above to take in fresh air? Those near the doors banged against them. No answer. They didn't just bar the doors, they sealed us in. Someone who peeked through cracks in the doors shouted. There were heavy boxes stacked against the outside of the cargo hold doors so that the men inside could not push them open no matter how hard they tried. And is anyone here from Kakru? Anyone who has served under Marshal Zindu from before? No one answered. The whole cargo hold was filled with surrendered Imperial soldiers. Yikes. The sailors themselves had long ago left on lifeboats. The rudders of the ships had been jammed to fix their course. The creaking, leaky ships, filled with 20,000 surrendered Imperial soldiers, sailed northward into the Kishi Channel. Tazu's hungry maw opened in front of them. 20,000 surrendered Imperial soldiers. 20 fucking thousand. 20,000. That's like the entire population of the town I live in. That's insane. And Tazu better never turn against Mata again, because that's beyond anything that should ever be expected in terms of a sacrifice. Tazu, now happily fed and strengthened by this sacrifice, grew even more violent and powerful. He careened north, shot out of the Kishi Channel, and circled around the Big Toe, and sucked half of the Imperial Armada into his bottomless maw. Without a break, he now moved down the eastern coast of Wolf's Paw, and within a few hours completed the circuit of the island. South of Tawaza, within sight of those on shore, Tazu caught up to the other half of the armada. Admiral Philo Kaima and all his men went to join their dead companions at the bottom of the ocean. Whoa! Like, it's not like Mata doesn't get something in return for this sacrifice, but like, Tazu, Jesus, you know? Kyle says, like, zoink, Scoob, I'm a war criminal. Yeah, war criminal. That's the word I'm looking for. Yikes. And Tazu says, it is in my nature to wander these seas daily. If the mortals wish to stand in my way, I'm well within my rights to do as I did. Tazu is right. Much as I abhor his methods, he has stayed within the letter of our pact. He only persuaded Mata Zindu to make this sacrifice. He persuaded by blackmailing. It's not, And Mata's advisors all disapprove. When we were merciful and allowed the prisoners to live, we were trapped on this island. A storm came and took away the lives of our soldiers, young men who deserved to die in glory, not at sea. But our victory became assured when I decided to listen to that old woman, who was truly Tazu's messenger, and offer him a sacrifice commensurate with his appetite. The gods were speaking to us, don't you see? I had been too merciful. Perhaps I allowed Kuni-Guru, my gentle brother, to affect me too much. After all, he's no great warrior. I had to remember that being merciful to one's enemies is the same as being cruel to one's own men. Tazu wanted blood, and I had to give it to him. Some of you may flinch at the thought of killing so many Zana prisoners, but know that there is divine justice in this. Years ago, my grandfather, Dazu Zindu, lost his war against Zana due to treachery. The Zana dog, Gotha Tonyeti, then buried alive the surrendering Kakru soldiers. Only now has that blood debt been repaid. I guess. The blood debt thing. That's one of those things that, I so deeply understand it. I am not somebody who, feels like, well, revenge doesn't serve anything. No, it does sometimes. Sometimes it does. But this is the kind of thing where I feel like he's retroactively trying to act like, well, this was about this other thing. It wasn't, though. Was it, Mata? You're creating something now that you've decided it applies to make yourself feel better and rationalize it away. And then he calls himself later Mata Zindu, the Butcher of Wolf's Paw. Like, he's taken on this name that's frankly beneath him. You know, like, if he is who he claims to be, he acts like it's a point of pride to be a butcher. It's not. That's what you call somebody who kills animals that have no means of self-defense. That is not what you call somebody who has, like, prowess on the field. And he thinks to himself that he was a god of death and he made his own laws of war. So, yeah, that's that. So let's go to 32. It turns out, Kyle, I spent so much time talking about that first chapter that it's probably good that I only read 2 this time. I am long-winded. My apologies, everybody. Chapter 32, The Housekeeper, outside Kerusa, the 12th month in the 4th year of the reign of righteous force. Lady Gia felt overwhelmed. Not being of noble birth, she never could seem to break into the social scene at Kerusa. Kuni was too coarse and practical-minded for most of the real hereditary nobles and kings and ambassadors, and that was reflected in the way she was treated. While Finn had been alive, his special regard for her had elevated her status somewhat. But after his death, the few noble ladies she had thought were her friends soon grew cold and distant. Though Mata called on her from time to time and made sure she and the children lacked nothing materially, his care didn't help much with her social life. Mata was stiff and aloof, and more feared than liked by the lords and ladies of the court. She gritted her teeth and tried to venture out into some of the parties in Kerusa on her own a few times, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the stately great ladies looked down on her and made fun of her too loud laughter, her homely merchant's family phrases, her loose and easy and unrefined manners. So that's the situation with Gia socially. Reminder, she also has a baby and she is pregnant again. So she has that to contend with as well. And you might be thinking, but doesn't she have servants to help her? Well, she does. But it is described thusly. She had a sizable household staff, but most of the servant girls were war orphans whom she had taken in out of pity. They were young and needed looking after themselves. Sometimes Gia felt like one of those women who took in baby birds that had fallen out of their nests and stray cats who meowed for milk. She was happy they were around, but sometimes her compassion became a burden. So yeah, hard can relate on this one. It is really difficult to explain to people who have never been the one who handles all of the labor in a household how overwhelming that can be. I'm in a better position now where Owen does his fair share. And while I handle more of the labor at home than he does, I'm also home more than him. And I have a more flexible schedule than him. So it makes sense. But I have most definitely been in relationships where I was the only one. And even in situations like the podcast, she's talking about like, well, I have people who help me, but they need looking after themselves. That's what I have been running into in terms of like feeling overwhelmed with the work that I have to do for the podcast, but also like the people who offer to help require as much supervision and answering of questions as it would take for me to do the things myself. So if like I have seen a lot of people ask me why I don't ask for help. And the thing is, it's not the kind of job that you can just train somebody and then move on. You need to keep an eye on things because if it doesn't get taken care of properly, it jams up the works on everything else later. Running a household is the same thing. And if these girls don't have experience, if they aren't capable or confident enough to do things without, like, that's a big thing, is the confidence. If they constantly come to you going, should I do this or this? You may as well do it yourself, because you're taking all this time out of your day to counsel them. And they aren't trusting their own judgment, or maybe don't have good enough judgment to trust on your part as well. So Gia is really struggling here. And the only person that she feels like she can depend on here is Otho Kryn, who was solicitous and kind and seemed to crave her approval in everything he did. Oh, who was she kidding? Gia understood what she really yearned for and was flattered by the attention. Truth be told, she sometimes admired his lanky form and shy but pretty eyes and imagined a secret tryst, but she'd quickly berate herself, blushing guiltily. Yeah, so I think just last episode, I was like, well, or maybe the episode before, I was like, Otho, I feel so bad for you because you love this woman obviously so much and nothing is ever going to come of it because she's deeply loyal. Well, here's the thing. I found this really fascinating, actually, because what happens here is Gia cheats on Kuni out of a feeling of, like, desperate loneliness. Which, not to get too personal here, but that is similar to things with Brendan and I and what led to me meeting Owen. I did not know Owen in person. I did not have a physical relationship with him. But I felt so completely alone in my marriage that I was reaching out looking for anything that would make me feel less alone. And I know this now, and I understand where this was coming from and the pattern. And I'm, determined not to do this to anyone again, because I know how much I hurt Brendan. However, it is a very real thing. And it's a really tough, because it sounds so cliche. I was just so lonely. And people act like, well, just grin and bear it and just get through it. But in her case, Kuni is not somebody who's out on a vacation and gonna come home. Life is gonna be like this for her. She's gonna be alone the majority of the time. She's going to give birth to their second child alone again. He is going to go off and do all of these stately things, and she is going to be home dealing with a household and children. And she is an exceptionally intelligent woman. And understandably, this might not really be enough for her. And I'm not at all saying that I really approve of what she's doing here. But I understand it on such a very personal level that I can't even throw stones at her for it the way that I want to, because I don't feel like her relationship with Kuni is the average marriage. This isn't a household where she's going out and having a tryst with some guy and then coming home and climbing into bed with her husband. She hasn't seen Kuni in how long now? He might come home and see the baby after she gives birth, and then he'll be gone again. It's a really strange situation, and she is a human being who needs to feel love and contact and validation like any person does. And denying that and expecting her to live like she's just a baby machine who can run a household and be there for Kuni when he gets home, and that's all she'll be, is deeply unfair. And Kyle says, also remember they didn't tell anyone about the whale plan, so no one even knows where he is. That too, there's a lot about the way that I don't doubt Kuni loves her. I really don't. I think he does. But there is so much about the way that he treats her that takes for granted that she will just be waiting for him. And I'm getting emotional now talking about this. But there is nothing worse than feeling like you're a stick of furniture to somebody. That they take it completely for granted that you will always be there and you will always be there when they need you. But if you need anything from them, it's going to be a problem. Making demands of any kind is going to be looked on as being selfish. That's not how you treat a partner. That's not how you treat somebody that you claim you want to spend your life with. And this might not be something that explodes their marriage entirely. But then again, it may be. I don't know. It all depends on like how long she decides to continue with this, how perceptive Kuni is when he comes home and sees them together. Is he going to figure it out? Is he going to consider the fact that he was also fucking lots of different women from this harem? And is he going to consider the fact that he was off on adventures and doing all kinds of like mind-blowing historical shit that's going to go down in legend while she is just trying to keep a household going? And that is what she's supposed to be satisfied with. There's a lot of questions in there, and it all requires a particular kind of self-awareness and a particular kind of sacrifice and a willingness to rebuild trust or change what trust means to you in regard to what you are expecting of your partner. And that's work. That's a lot of work. As somebody who has gone through that and trying that whole process of like trying to rebuild something, there are times when you don't think in the end that it's going to be worth it, that your relationship can come back from this, or that you are going to be able to get what you need the way you thought anymore. Because we grow and change a lot as we go through life. And there are plenty of us who get into relationships young thinking that we have an idea of what we want, and only, 5 years later suddenly realize like, this isn't working for me at all. I thought this would be enough, and it isn't. And I never would have seen this coming because I was a different person 5 years ago with different priorities, expectations, and desires. So I don't feel like it's heading in that direction for her and Kuni. Because I feel like she does care. I don't know. There's so much to this whole thing and to the way that she thinks of herself in relationship to Kuni that I don't really know what it would even look like if she decided that what she had with Kuni was not enough beyond having an affair with somebody else while he's away. I just don't know what that looks like. Like, does she go off and begin to have adventures and leave her kids in the care of somebody else? Does she decide that she wants to bring her kids with her when she goes on adventures? Does she decide that she's satisfied with running a household and doing only that as long as she has somebody that she cares about with her? Because maybe it's not the drudgery of like day-to-day tasks and everything that's getting to her so much as just the sheer loneliness associated with that. And not having friends that you can relate to, that you can like, that was also part of my situation when I was going through this thing. It's not that I didn't have friends, but I didn't feel the like deep connection to them that I have with friends now. And that also makes it so that you can't talk to anybody about what you're feeling, and you can't share with them how unhappy you are and get advice on how to handle this in a better way. So she's just isolated in this just really heartbreaking fashion that I didn't think about at all, because I'm so used to wives in these stories being background characters. And that's part of what I love about this book, is that he keeps taking things and expectations and upending them and being like, yeah, well, remember how Gio is just his wife that had his babies? Well, she's a person and she's bored and she needs more than that in her life. And what is that? What does that mean? And I don't know what it means, And I'm going to read this because it just... she realized this was the norm, not the exception in their life. Though they had married for a future of shared excitement most of the time, Kuni went away and had adventures while she stayed behind with the children in the tedious wait of the quotidien. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Where was the most interesting thing for her? In a few hours, she had to get up again and smile and keep up a stream of cheerful chatter all day. People needed her. Everyone depended on her. She was the one who had to be strong and sensible. One day she was sure she was going to be sucked dry and fall down where she stood. This is such a common thing with wives and mothers. Like, you guys, if you are not a woman, and I'm not even a mother and I've experienced this, so I can't fucking fathom how much worse it must be if you have kids. But if you're not a woman and you're in a relationship with one and you are unsure of how she feels in this regard, just open that up for conversation and see what comes pouring out. Because it is just now starting to get attention, the labor that women do that goes completely unappreciated. And it's unappreciated because it is expected. It is a given that we're going to do it, because if it doesn't get done, then nobody's doing it. Certainly the man isn't doing it. It's really kind of baffling when you think about the number of men who live alone. How do they do this? And yet the expectation when they move in with a woman is that she's going to take over these parts of his life. And unless you have that talk and really lay down expectations surrounding that, almost always that is the unspoken expectation. And this line of, she realized this was the norm, not the exception in their life, was like a stab to the heart. Because I remember the exact moment that I realized that about my marriage. That I kept making excuses and saying that things were bad because of this or that. And gradually began to realize that years had passed and I had been saying those same things over and over again, as if they were special circumstances, when in fact they were the way things were. And coming to that realization causes you to have to reevaluate everything. And it is really scary. And really, it sets you on this like whole line of doubt about whether or not you're being too demanding, whether or not you should expect this. Are you being unfair? And it's, especially as women, we are trained to put other people first. And we are trained to doubt ourselves in a way that men are not taught. And it leads to us feeling like we're asking too much, when if we were a man, we wouldn't think that at all, because we are used to getting what we think we deserve, because that is how society has conditioned us. So I felt this chapter in my fucking bones, is what I'm saying. And the description of just feeling like she's going to be sucked dry, like everybody is some kind of like emotional vampire, that is, she's not even allowed to be sad. She has to maintain this cheerfulness for everyone else, because she can't even live in the emotion that she's having. She's not even allowed that. Is so real and painful and sad and true. She felt so alone, and a heated thought rose into her mind that she resented Kuni for leaving her behind like this. She felt bad immediately and tried to push the thought away, but that only made it linger and hurt worse. I knew this was going to be hard, but this is the path I've chosen. She began to cry, at first quietly, and then louder. She bit down on her pillow to stop the sounds from spilling out into the hallway. Why do I feel so helpless? So this is when she begins to punch her pillow. And she thinks about, all of a sudden, as she stops like from punching her pillow, realizes that she's lost control. I have to find a spar, a piece of driftwood to hang on to. So she decides to make a choice, and she goes to see Otho and climbs into bed with him. And again, I just can't be angry at her for this, because sometimes what we consider to be right and wrong is totally devoid of context and understanding what humans need. And that, you know, we're not always willing to meet halfway on that. You know, Kuni's not going to stay home and be with her, and she doesn't want to ask that of him. But if they both are unwilling to demand that of him, that emptiness has to be made up somehow, because expecting her to simply go without is not fair either. So this is when Gia tells Otho to put it out there that she's looking for a housekeeper. And this woman shows up named Soto, who I fully have expected to reveal herself to be a god. I'm not sure that's true or not, but because of the amount of interference we've had so far from gods, I'm just like side-eyeing the hell out of her. And Gia, when she's interviewing Soto, says, "Carusa is filled with many noble houses, and many of them look on me with contempt. I'm not a good stepping stone to a better position in the future. If I wanted to live in houses run by spoiled children who were too old to spank, I would have knocked on those doors." All right, Soto. Shit. Kyle says, "I will simply note that we've heard the name Soto before." Ooh, have we? I don't remember. Oh, shit. Soto turned out to be an efficient but kind housekeeper, and soon Gia's house hummed along like a well-oiled machine. She took the most responsible servant girls and had them take turns taking care of the baby during the day so Gia could be freed up. The servant girls learned useful domestic skills from her that would stand them in good stead for future employment, while the stable hands and footmen appreciated her gentle touch and eye for details. She took care of things that Steward Kryn never bothered with, such as making sure to give everyone an extra egg on the festival days. And Soto told such wonderful stories about the old days before the conquest. Even Gia sometimes was mesmerized when Soto spun one of her yarns about the old Kakru aristocracy for the entertainment of the servants in the kitchen. I feel like this has something to do with it, the fact that she tells stories, but... and Gia begins to, befriend her, and Soto is thinking to herself about how she had never really expected to like Gia, but that she understands now that Kuni must be somebody of consequence to have chosen Gia, because Gia is such an unusual, strong, smart woman that it speaks highly of Kuni that he loves her, which I really like. And she is trying to encourage Gia. There's this moment where she's telling her the story about Lady Zai. She was far more of a patriot than he was, and she encouraged him to use his gift with words for some higher purpose than entertainment. Had he not listened to her, perhaps they would both have lived out full lives in the mountains. "And died in obscurity," said Soto. "But today every child of Kakru can recite the poems of Larusin and revere his name. Not even Mapidere dared to ban his books, though the poet had cursed the name of Zana on every page." "So you think he might be thankful to his wife?" "I'd like to think that they made their decisions together and were happy to face the consequences together." And she finally says something later about, not talking about politics. And Soto's like, "We can only do that for so long. But the shit's going to come up." Which, that's how I feel about it in general. When people are like, "Can we not talk about politics?" I'm like, for how long? Because not forever. And Soto asks, "What do you think of Mata?" And Gia says, "I think he's without a doubt the most important member of the rebellion. I only know that he killed a lot of people. Let us speak no more of politics. That may not be possible forever, Gia. You're a political wife, whether you want to be or not." So then we go to Soto's POV. And Soto is aware that Gia is having an affair and does not hold it against her at all. She's just kind of like, yeah, this makes sense. Gia could become a force to be reckoned with, a shaper of the path of the rebellion so that its fruits might taste sweet for more than just men like Matazindu, men who looked to an ideal past but were blind to messy realities. Soto hoped to nudge Gia along the path that she was meant to take, which would require Soto to reveal the truth of her own past. But now that she knew of this wrinkle in Gia's life, she had to consider what it meant. And brings up the fact that men falling in and out of love with women is considered par for the course. But a woman having that same reaction to love is not seen the same way. The world did not tolerate such betrayals by the wives, if betrayal was what they were, as it tolerated the same betrayals by husbands. But the world was wrong. Accommodations for the vagaries of the heart should be made for women as well as men. So Gia was not a woman bound by conventions when it came to matters of the heart. Soto hoped Gia would be as bold in making use of her position and influence as she was in her passions. She hoped it for Gia's own happiness as well as the happiness of the men and women of Kakru and all of Dara. Soto went back to sleep and said nothing of what she knew. So now that you said that, Kyle, I'm trying to remember, but I can't put a finger on it. Like, I have no idea. But like in chapter 2, oh snap, that far back, huh? I'm going to have to go check. But damn. So yeah, good thing I only covered 2 chapters actually, because this was a lot. But thank you, Kyle, very much for the commission. And yeah, I will try and cover more chapters next time to make up for it. I hope that I did it justice, nevertheless. And thank you to all of you for listening. I know there are a few of you who are listening to this who have not actually read the books, which I find so funny. But I hope that I am still keeping it interesting for you. So with that, everybody, I will say goodbye. And until next week, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.